If you're considering buying a second home in the North Carolina high country, you should definitely watch this video. Today, we're going to talk about lifestyle, potential ROI if you're considering it as an investment, and we'll also talk about all the things you need to know before you buy. All right, so let's talk about why are people buying homes up in the North Carolina high country? And it could be anything from a vacation home / vacation rental. It could be a mountain retreat. There are some things that you're going to probably want to understand before you make a decision or purchase a home. So in this video, hopefully we can provide a little more clarity around exactly what you need to know when buying a second home in the mountains. All right, so let's talk about the allure of the high country. And the first thing that you'll often hear people talk about is you still have all 4 seasons. So depending on where you're coming from, the summers are super cool, especially if you're at elevation. That's going to be a desire for a lot of the people looking. The fall is just so gorgeous, so vibrant with the fall foliage and the leaf season. You've got winter, of course, with 3 ski resorts available to you. It's actually like, I'll jokingly call it the Vale of the Southeast, but if you want to ski and you don't want to hop on a plane, there's a huge draw to be in the high country. And then of course the spring, you've got the wildflowers and everything coming back to life. So like myself, we split time, we spend the bulk of the year in Florida, but when we're up in the high country, we see things that we've missed. I grew up in the Northeast, lived all over the country, especially through the Midwest for a long time, relocated to Southwest Florida about 13 years ago, been there ever since, and you miss the seasons. So that is a big appeal for a lot of the people that are buying in the high country. And let's be honest, it's for the scenery, right? You've got these majestic mountain views, you've got beautiful trails if you love to hike or backpack. The Appalachian Trail runs just outside of the high country on the Tennessee border. You've got rivers and streams. It's just really a magical place, and it captivates a lot of us. And truthfully, it's pretty accessible while also being a little bit remote. So you're close to a lot of the major cities in the Carolinas, parts of Tennessee, Virginia, other areas. So you can get up there. I come up from Southwest Florida, and the reality is there's not an airport that flies super close. I can get into Asheville direct, certainly I can go into Charlotte direct, and then you're just a few hours away. But for a lot of people along the East Coast, they're driving, so it is accessible. And then the other part of this is demand, I would say, balanced with scarcity. There's a lot of people looking to buy into the mountains, and yet there's only so much inventory. There is a lot of land, but we'll get into, and especially over the course of this video and other video content, there's a big draw for views. So when we talk about different homes and different options that are available to you, we'll often talk about homes with views and homes without views, and you're going to see it's 2 distinctly priced points, even when they're in the same community. All right, so now I'll share a little bit of a story, and this is kind of interesting. This is our personal story of how we found the high country. And honestly, it was almost by accident. So Angie my wife, had booked a cabin on some vacation site, Blue Ridge Cabin Rentals or something along those lines. And we actually spent the first half of our vacation in Washington, D.C. It was over the 4th of July week. This is, 8 years ago at least. And the second half, we spent a week in Asheville or just outside of Asheville. So we booked this cabin, and when we made it down, it was a little more than just outside of Asheville. It was about 45 minutes outside of Asheville in a cute little town called Burnsville. And at one point I said to my wife, I think 4th of July that year was on a Tuesday. And I said, there's got to be a place doing fireworks on the weekend to celebrate. And that's how we found Beech Mountain. So we drove up. Beech Mountain does them on a Saturday every year. It's super fun. You can sit on, whether it's the town sled hill, or you can certainly watch it from the ski resort itself. It was so wholesome. This was, again, probably 8 years ago. They did a large barbecue. I think they called it a pig roast at the time. It was pulled pork, turkey legs. And I just remember we drove up. We had a big expedition or something that we had rented. We opened the back. The kids jumped out. We threw chairs and a blanket down. They played on the hill, until it was dark. And then the fireworks, they're right above you, and it was, I said to Angie at the time, I'm like, this was pretty awesome. So guess what? We went back the next year, but we stayed on Beech Mountain. We went back once or twice a year, every year thereafter, and then eventually bought on Beech Mountain. So that's kind of how we got there. This is an area I think that just speaks to you. It will kind of captivate you. And there's so many different towns, which we'll talk about a little bit, that really will match your lifestyle. So depending on what you're looking for, we can help guide you. It's going to be Boone, Banner Elk, Blowing Rock, Beach, whatever it might be, there's options for everybody. All right, so let's shift gears and talk a little bit about trends we're seeing in the real estate market in the high country. And it's very similar, which is kind of strange, to what we're seeing in Southwest Florida as well. We're seeing a big drop in the actual number of sold properties. I think it was almost 30% in Watauga County as of April or May, and it continues to be a decline over prior years. Now, part of that is there was a huge boom during the years of COVID. So there's a lot of people that were trying to get their mountain escapes. There are some areas that allow for short-term rentals, so it's attractive. There's kind of that, well, we'll buy up there, and when we can't use it, we'll rent it. So that philosophy. So we have a decrease in sales. We've got an increase in inventory, but surprisingly, we're not really seeing a big drop in pricing, unlike Southwest Florida, where there actually is a fair amount of reduction in the pricing. In the high country, we're actually seeing pricing holding pretty well, and in fact, it's up around 5% year over year in most of the counties. All right, so now we're going to talk about what you might want to prioritize as you're considering buying in the high country. And the first thing we'll talk about is location. Every town has kind of its own vibe, and something's going to speak to you. We say that all the time, drive around. You're probably going to find an area that just really, it kind of captures you. So when you think about Boone, it's a little more vibrant. It's got year-round activities and amenities. When you think about Blowing Rock, I jokingly say that is like the set of a Hallmark Christmas movie. It's just so quaint. It's so walkable. Banner Elk, I'll say it again, it's almost the Vale of the Southeast. It sits right between Beech Mountain and Sugar Mountain. So for those that like to ski, that can be a great area. It has a little bit of a luxury feel, although you could argue that for any of these towns, quite honestly. Banner Elk is surrounded by really kind of affluent gated communities like Linville Ridge. You've got Elk River Valley. Anyways, there's a bunch of them. But then you get into areas like Valley Cruces, which has a super laid back feel, a little more quiet. So, every town's different. I'll just say that. So when you're thinking about it, do a little research, give us a call. We're happy to talk through. We use a process that we call our wish list, which we can actually send to you. You can fill it out. It helps us best understand what exactly you're looking for, so that when we get on the first call together, we get right to business. There's some small talk, of course, but we already know what you're looking for: size, price point, amenities, lifestyle, if you have pets, because there can be restrictions in some gated communities. So anyways, that's an area that you're going to want to think more about in terms of just location as your starting point. The next thing you might want to be considering are any zoning or rental restrictions. Depending on how you envision using the property, there's a lot of restrictions. Boone, as example, is pretty hard to rent within the town limits. But then Sugar Mountain, Beech Mountain both allow for short-term rentals. Communities like Blue Ridge Mountain Club, there's pockets within it that allow for short-term rentals. So you're really going to want to understand either zoning restrictions, there might be deed zoning type restrictions, and then any type of rental restrictions as well, depending on how you want to use the property. So we'll definitely want to have a conversation about that based on how you envision using the property itself. And kind of following in line with that, there's also, you want to think about is just seasonal demand. Depending on, and I guess this is more toward the lens of those that think they want to rent the property, you're going to have a couple seasons. You've got leaf season, you've got ski season. Summer is a great time. There's a lot of families that want a vacation. A lot of people from Florida want to get away and escape the heat, humidity, etc. So you do want to understand what are some of those drivers and what you can expect from a demand perspective in terms of inventory, and then also pricing and expected revenue. All right, so the next thing we might want to talk about is the home itself and some of the design or features. What kind of utilities? Is it on cell and septic, or cell, well, and septic, or is it on city water? That's an area that we talk about a fair amount. A lot of the mountain communities are going to be on well and septic, but we want to talk about driveways. How steep is it? We might want to talk about views. Like having a view might be really important to you. It also might not be. You just want to have the cool temps and feel like you're in the forest, living in a treehouse. So everybody has different wants and needs, and we'll talk through that with you. All right, now we probably need to talk about budget. That's going to be a big point. It's going to be really the biggest lever we're going to pull as it relates to the type of home and the location that you're looking in. The truth is there's great homes across all the different price points, and the good homes tend to retain their value really well in the high country. But we also want to talk about mortgages. Buying a second home is different than having a primary residence. It typically requires a little more of a down payment. You might be more in the 20 to 30% down payment. A lot of people pay cash. It's in most of the higher end communities, I'd say more than half of the homes are sold in cash. Very similar to what we see in Southwest Florida. But there's other costs to consider, insurance. You've got property maintenance, especially if you're not going to be there all the time. Are you going to have a home watch or someone that maintains the property in your absence? So we'll talk through a lot of that and make sure that you're thinking about the different costs that go into ownership on a mountain or in the high country as a whole. All right, so now the next thing we might want to talk about is timing. Buying off season generally creates a few more buying opportunities, but you also have things like in the ski season, depending on where you're trying to purchase, If the property is in a rental program, as an example, it might be harder to see. And that honestly can be throughout the year. Just depends on seasonality and kind of what's occurring. Another thing to consider is when timing is interest rates. Like we had a period, gosh, probably it was 18 months ago, interest rates dropped. And I mean, like for like a week and a half, we had a pretty big surge in buyer activity. And, you know, as of filming, this is almost mid-October. Interest rates are the lowest they've been in almost a year. You know, so we're starting to see some of the buyers come off the sidelines and move back into the market. So we should talk about that as well. And now let's just talk about, how do you plan to use the property? Is this something you envision, you know, getting up to for long weekends? Do you plan to spend a few weeks a year there? Are you going to split time in summer in the high country, as an example? Do you intend to rent it? Maybe it's more of a hybrid purchase where when you're not using it, you're going to rent it. There's a lot of different use cases and scenarios, and you know it's going to be important that we talk through a lot of that before you dive into a search. Again, thinking back to some of the rental restrictions or even zoning requirements as it relates to these properties. Okay, now let's talk about some of the pitfalls. And you know, there's some extreme weather at times, especially at the highest elevations within the high country. So you want to think about what kind of maintenance are you going to have. How accessible is the property, especially in those periods when you have, you know, maybe 3, 4 to 8 inches of snow that fall. This is a real thing. You know, like I jokingly talk about mountain time, I think it actually can be harder than island time. It can be hard to get contractors and handymen, etc., to be at your property. And the reason being, like I'll give you an example, Beech Mountain. I think there's about 600 full-time residents, and that's actually up quite a bit since COVID. But there's 23 or 2,400 structures at this point. So it gives you an idea of just how many people own second homes, you know, in these markets. And there's just not enough people to do all the work that's required. So if you can find a good handyman and we can help with that, you want to hang on to them. You know, like getting someone to show up on time or at all is actually more difficult than it may sound. And I'm trying to not make light of it because it is a real thing. So that's a consideration when you think about it. So infrastructure, you might have an amazing view, but how hard is it to get there? So, you know, we're going to talk through all of that with you when you're really just beginning your search, and we're putting together the criteria that's going to help get the right properties to you. All right, so hopefully you've learned some things, but maybe that's better understood that just there's a lot to consider. So if you're really considering coming up and buying a home more than just, you know, a 1-week vacation, I would implore you, reach out to us. You know, we have that wish list document that we can send out. It's a really good starting point to better understand what you're looking for. And then my team and I, we can hop on a call with you and we'll start to narrow down locations and the type of properties that you're considering. And we'll create a really custom search for you that will begin to send property alerts that just more closely align to what you're looking for. And honestly, there's probably some things that you haven't thought about that we're going to bring up in those conversations. So if you're interested, reach out to us. We're on social media everywhere. The information is down below as well, but send us an email at info@gillettegroup.com or give us a call on our main contact line, which is 239-776-6872. We look forward to talking to you soon.